It's not a lake, it's an ocean.
Alan, wake up.
In the frigid cold of the mountainous Pacific Northwest, there rests a small American town known as Bright Falls. The locals know each other like good friends. They stick their noses into each other's business like family. Their roles are understood. The routines they go about are well known. The already calm and quiet air that lingers over Bright Falls only gets quieter at night, the denizens respectfully resting their heads in unison. A breeze blows through the hills and mountaintops, rustling the leaves of trees, bristling the fur of wildlife. The breeze is a warning, an interruption in the routine schedule of Bright Falls, signaling that something is coming. For the past 67 years, Bright Falls has traditionally partook in an honored tradition of friendship, community, and camaraderie. In just a couple of weeks, we will be joining them for this time-honored celebration, the 68th annual Deer Fest. Another gust of wind ushers with it something on the horizon, a barge carrying vehicles from one side to the other. Accompanying the motorized monstrosities are the barge's passengers, two visitors, a local, the necessary operator, and a silent stranger. The overhead bridge marks on its side, "Welcome to Bright Falls." World-renowned author Alan Wake and his photographer wife Alice take in the scenery. What is planned to be a vacation to get away from the stresses of reality will soon unravel, revealing a descent deep down into the madness of fiction. For what shines on the surface of Bright Falls conceals the true belly of darkness underneath. Not a dark secret of murders and deceit, but instead a horror of the eldritch and unknowable. A lake, massive in comparison to the adjacent small town, deeper than man could ever possibly know. Within Cauldron Lake lies something sinister, patiently waiting for another victim. Through circumstances of dark manipulation, Alan will find himself as the occupant of the cabin resting on a tiny island here in Cauldron Lake. In said cabin, the trap will spring. Racked with writer's block, Alice has encouraged Alan to take a moment, slow down, enjoy the scenery and the atmosphere, and just give his writing another shot here in this quaint and comfortable cabin. She reveals the typewriter she planted without Alan's knowledge, mentioning a local doctor who helps with creatives like himself. Alan is furious. It's not that simple. Writer's block isn't a matter that can be solved by a change in scenery. To have writer's block is to feel out of ideas, a car without gas. After killing off his beloved main character, Alex Casey, who has been the backbone of Alan's success, he has gone 2 years without being able to write anything more complex than a thought on a napkin. This trip was supposed to be about getting away, not thinking. That's what Alan needed, not this. His frustration boils over. Alan is known for his passion and his fury. His name circulates the news most recently due to him attacking a member of the purulent polite that is the paparazzi. Alan storms out of the cabin. He could never hurt Alice. She's far too precious to him. His love for her is as intense as his poorly subdued rage. He takes a moment to reflect on his frustration. This whole trip was to get him closer to this Dr. Hartman Alice mentioned. He feels betrayed, even if he knows deep down it was done with purposeful care. His quiet nighttime reflection is cut immensely short as a sudden sound is followed by a familiar scream. Alice cries out for Alan. He races towards her. Her screams die out before he reaches the cabin, finding it empty. A broken railing on the porch catches his eye. Looking over the edge, Alan is so sure he sees it. The image of Alice being dragged to its depths. With a hokey, he gives no second thought. Alan dives into the lake.
Keep going.
Alan jerks awake, his car having plowed through a railing, stopped only by nature set along a precarious locale. How did he get here? Where is Alice? What madness has Alan seeped into? He does not yet know it, but a week has passed between the moment he touched the lake's surface and now. The questions pile up. By the end of our narrative, only a handful will receive an answer. I'm the hairiest hair, author of these musings of a mundane madman. I'll be your captive captain on this expedition into yet another behemoth of gaming legend. After experiencing this game, I, like its protagonist, feel sucked into its tale, unable to escape its pull. This title is a form created from the passions of a man and his team as they pour every ounce of themselves into it. What this results in is one of the greatest experiences in gaming that I slept on for far too long. It is like a book of eldritch knowledge. Every page unravels something deeper. Every word contains a curious chokehold. Every time I find myself comfortable in its embrace, a shadow lurks around the corner, ready to consume my mind. I have held my own ambitions at bay just for this moment. With a narrow scope, I wish to dive into this progenitor of peril. Think not of of what comes after, let us just consider the world presented to us here in this game and truly take it all in. For so long I have held myself at a distance, but now it is time. I welcome the madness into my humble, hollow hair skull. Join me as we unpack the narrative nightmare of Alan Wake. Alan Wake is a curious piece of creativity that continually contradicts itself. Rather than causing confusion in its audience, this curiosity creates captivation. Alan Wake is a game that takes its audience on twists that seem expected, simple, and predictable. However, what it performs in the realm of unpredictability is what suddenly takes it from being a simple, spooky game to being an elevation of the psychological horror genre in video games. It took me 3 times. The first playthrough ended rather quickly. The controls felt funny, the characters felt uninteresting, the game itself existed in a world predating its cult classic status. What there was to love about it, I hadn't found. Without the proper motivation, I turned the game off and returned to my list of routinely uninspired Xbox 360 titles. My second attempt came during the month of October, during my streaming era. Now that Alan Wake had earned itself a proper status as a beloved title, I attempted to force myself into a position of play. Surely by the end of this single stream, I would locate what I was missing and finally want to sink my teeth into it. Alas, I put it down again. Despite meeting and falling in love with aspects and characters, the eventual degradation couldn't be helped. The game began to somehow feel like it was all so dull once more. I found myself disinterested and bored. Had I carried on in this manner, streaming the game in a public procedure, I would likely not have taken the time to stand around and breathe in all of the little things about this title. I impress upon you, it is the little things that are the most important in a game such as this. Unfortunately, Alan Wake once again fell victim to circumstance and went back on the shelf. Like a cry from out in the pitch black night, it was announced, Alan Wake 2. Somewhat unexpected, potentially unlikely to ever see the light of day, somehow indicative of the character himself. The sequel crawled from out of obscurity and into frame. I witnessed with pleasure and glee. I was happy for the Alan Wake fans, not including me. I still awaited the day when I would join them. Alan Wake 2 released, blowing the minds of many. The buzz was unavoidable. The excitement was palpable. This game was being recognized as an absolute juggernaut of mixed media, destroying concepts and building upon itself with new ones. To say that it called my name would be to understate just how much this kind of content is my bag. The performance at the Game Awards was the final straw. As I told the unpaid intern live that night, confidently I stated that what we were witnessing is from the game, knowing this to be true, but not accurately considering the magnitude. Unbeknownst to myself, something clicked in my mind. Within only a short time, the name Old Gods of Asgard rang in my head over and over. The song played in my mind. All the words were slightly incorrect, but the sentiment was strong. I watched as Sam Lake and Alan Wake's actor danced cheerily, cutting rugs within my mental palace. This was no longer a game I wanted to play. It was an experience I needed to claim for myself. Playthrough number 3 finally happened, fueled by a sense of determination. It, however, didn't take long before I found myself no longer in need of this steadfast stubbornness. Motivation lay waiting in the opening hour, as I directed Alan to walk into the Oh Dear Diner just as I had twice before. This time, I performed a sharp intake, freezing as my eyes captured the image before me. Like a revisit to a memory unlocked with forbidden knowledge, a third eye had been opened. The sight of the old man in the booth made me audibly gasp. He wasn't just an old man this time. He was recognizable. I knew this appearance well. It had been in my head for weeks now. This was an aged version of the man who had been ringing in my ear. Instantly, I recognized them, the old gods of Asgard. My mind began to shatter under the weight of curious realization, the first time of many to follow. Alan Wake wouldn't have needed to provide me with any more motivation than the desire to seek just how deep the Remedy rabbit hole goes, and yet, motivation it provided. Alan Wake is a video game filled to bursting with genre tropes and subversions of those tropes. Connected to a world far deeper than itself, the game begs you to not only explore it, but the massive connections it contains to the entire Remedy body of works. However, upon completion, I recognize that Alan Wake has a lot to say when standing on its own. For that reason, I'd like to slowly dissect this world one piece at a time. Starting today with our dark touch subject, I will be ignoring the scarce knowledge I have of the world of Control. I have yet to peek in the door of Alan Wake 2, not even screenshots have made it my way. This is a near blind playthrough and subsequent response to the twice overlooked, flawed masterpiece that is Alan Wake. Picking up where we left off, Alan stumbles out of his car and away from the wreckage. The pile of questions he already has is about to get much steeper. A bright light, unnaturally incandescent, shines upon Alan. As he approaches, the light vanishes. In its place is a piece of paper. Alan picks it up, scanning it with curiosity. What he reads, he almost can't believe. It's the manuscript for The Departure, the planned title for the next book Alan never got started on. The author himself. Alan refutes this fact. He definitely did not write this, at least not that he can remember. The horror lies not here in the obscurity of its origin. Instead, we focus on the manuscript's contents. It describes a man with an axe turning to attack the protagonist. Whether you realize it in this moment, or you wait until you read a few more pages found throughout the game, you likely already understand. These pages accurately depict the moments to come in this game. Sometimes they tell of off-screen events. Sometimes they tell a more simplified version of something that's already occurred. Most, like this, describe the imminent danger that will approach in the night of Bright Falls, threatening the man who is both our game and our new narrative's protagonist. I would like to go ahead and prime you for a thought that we will continue at a more relevant time. Let us, for a moment, ponder on the relationship between an author and their creations, more specifically, their characters. These characters, brought to life with the simple intention of providing a purpose in a narrative, are tools of the creator. Their lives may have existed before their introduction on the page. Their deaths may come long after. However, the entire reason for inserting them into a tale is to use them to the plot's purpose, whatever that may be. In the world of a happier tale, this can be of no consequence. However, what of the characters found in a thrilling novel full of conflict? Conflict is what pushes and pulls a story. Without it, the plot does not properly progress. With it, we provide a compelling plight for our current players to perform their way through. The malicious toying of a creator, writing a protagonist into existence just to make them suffer for one's entertainment. If we pretend for a moment that these characters aren't fictitious, but instead a writer is merely putting to paper the events that mark a short moment in this character's life, is this fair and just? Can a creator so truly love their creations if they are so easily willing to watch them suffer by events made by their own dark minds? What do these pages on the manuscript reveal? Are they prophetic predictions of the future? Are they the account of events that have already transpired? Or, more harrowingly, is Alan Wake the author of his own demise? Is he both the writer in the chair as well as the character in the tale? Which is which? Is there a difference? Fascinating on a different level is the nature of the manuscript pages in the context of this world as a video game collectible. In most games, these would be found as fun extras, dripping with details for those who wish to know every inch of the game, allowing them to be forgettable for those seeking a quicker pace. While the manuscripts easily allow themselves to remain missable, their relevance to the plot makes them stand out in ways unexpected. We, the players, aren't just reading these pages, gaining bonus insight on events. Alan is too. Anyone who gets their hands on a page of the manuscript can, theoretically, read into this uncertain and dangerous future. This marriage of gameplay and story doesn't start nor stop here. However, it's a highlight of this game's dedication to an innovative layer of immersion. Layered so sweetly on top of that is the immersive experience provided to us by radios and television sets. Pat Main hosts a radio show like any small town would possess, having intermissions to talk to himself, the listeners, or occasionally a random assortment of guests. These brief discussions give you peeks into the lives and ongoings of Bright Falls, connecting us to its citizens and their little town blues. Small, randomly scattered televisions can also be found around the map, featuring the transparent Twilight Zone homage, Night Springs. The name clearly evocative of the very town we're in. Night Springs is perhaps the disturbing fictional version of Bright Falls, filled with ironic twists and impossible turns, even more evident when looking at the parallel of both of the opposing words. Night, bright, springs, falls. At other times, these television sets display something very different. Rather than fun, bonus inclusions of a show somewhat unrelated, we can see Alan Wake, the writer, as he pounds away on his typewriter in the cabin, presumably creating the manuscript we now hold. Alan gives us dramatic narrations, describing the nightmarish creative process he finds himself in, and each time we are graced with his digital presence, he is both more deranged and more aware of the viewer's gaze. No matter which of these experiences you divulge into, they all require the same process from you. In order order to partake, you must stand there and actively, as a player, choose to fixate your eyes and ears on the subject. Well, for the radio, you just listen, but the TV is rarely used in the game as a focal point or something displayed in full screen. This means in order to view it, a player must make the active choice to leave themselves vulnerable as they position themselves in a way that gives the best view of the TV. Even with that best view, you will likely be leaning forward and squinting. These sets are small, taking such little real estate on your screen, yet successfully capturing my undivided attention every time. With this, once again, Alan Wake successfully provides another steep layer of unnecessary immersion that could have easily gone in the useless and boring direction that so many other games in both past and present have. However, this is a game of clear metafictional context, so to ignore the already sinister implications of the manuscript is one thing, but to not focus on the fact that Alan, within the television, is both portrayed by his live-action actor, as well as becoming more and more aware of the peeping camera into his life. That's its own very separate story that we'll get to later. Equipping himself with a gun and a flashlight, Alan prepares to defend himself from the corrupted version of Carl Stuckey, the man who was supposed to pass off the keys to our cabin, had he not been replaced by a completely normal and non-threatening bog-standard old lady in black. Stuckey, like so many others going forward, has been taken. The darkness that surrounds this place infects the residents of Bright Falls and bends them to the will of a higher, darker power. To defend himself, Alan must use the tools available to him. The darkness defends its deranged denizens from damage. For regular bullets to affect them, we must shine our torch on them until we see and hear a satisfying pop, the shadows retracting. I just realized that I put torch here as if I'm an Englishman. I'm not changing it though. Now, in a weakened state, enemies are vulnerable but no less dangerous. At nearly all times in combat scenarios, you will find yourself surrounded by these taken. When illuminating an enemy, they will typically stagger and cover themselves from the light, slowing their approach. This is one of the ways the game maintains tension and forces players to think while acting during encounters. When do you switch off of a given taken to light up another? Do you shine the light on one just to stagger them and give you enough time to reposition? Or do you stand your ground and let them surround you, slowly chipping away at their shadowy shield? This game of battle management is the main bread and butter of combat. As the game goes along, the number of enemies will increase, and your skills of micromanaging will be put through many maddening tests. Nearly the entirety of Alan Wake consists of this. Pop the shadowy shield, plug your victim with bullets. Though it is no survival horror, you may still manage to find yourself low on ammunition. Thus, in between firefights, Alan must scrounge, diving into every nook and cranny attempting to replenish his supply. Guns come in only a handful of varieties: a handgun, a shotgun, a rifle, the bullets for each being separate, as they should be. You will nearly always be carrying a handgun in the game, but with Alan only able to carry one of the heavier weapons, you must consider your current ammunition, predicament, and playstyle. Reloading in this game remains as an equally remarkable mechanic. Essentially, you aren't just juggling the usual standard of a weapon wheel, but the necessary addition of a flashlight, with its own ammunition in the form of batteries. As important as bullets and the acquisition of said bullets is, batteries may be even more important in this game. Holding the aim button allows Alan to pull the flashlight up and focus its beam, deteriorating the enemy's protective shield even quicker, but at the cost of burning through battery quicker. What's interesting to note is that the battery does regenerate, making it entirely possible to sluggishly trudge through this game with a conservative survival horror mindset. However, enemies like flocks of ravens and random objects animated into hostility don't go down with bullets, requiring the flashlight's heavy usage to defeat. With Energizer branded batteries scattered throughout the map and these dark enemies constantly popping up throughout the game, there's very little reason to shy away from the constant consumption and disposal of this secondary ammunition. Speaking of the ammunition, reloading your firearm has this engaging satisfaction to it that not every game possesses. There are no clips or magazines in the woods of Bright Falls, therefore bullets are reloaded manually. Revolvers, rifles, and shotguns each requiring the more time-consuming and intimate effort of every bullet spent being replaced by a bullet earned. Pressing the reload button will guarantee you an, eventually, fully loaded weapon. However, the far more efficient and satisfying function is to rapidly tap your reload button, speeding up the reloading process. Not only does this result in a more satisfying interaction than the usual press to reload function, but it also allows there to be even more tension within encounters. Another layer of micromanaging, and another reason to constantly want to position yourself as far away from the taken as you reasonably can. In addition to this game of consideration is the all-powerful flare gun, somewhat rare yet immensely useful. The player will often be mentally challenged with the consideration of its usage. Do you play this powerful card now, or save it for a stickier situation that may never come? Though it is no room clearer, it certainly does get close. The sound design and visual pop of its overbearing red glow team up to really provide a satisfying breath of relief, as the flare gun not only drowns the enemy in light, popping the shields, but a healthy dose of damage too. It is perhaps similar in equivalence to a grenade launcher, which only goes hand in hand with the actual grenades given to the player. Flashbangs are an invaluable weapon to get out of trouble. A toss, short pause, then a blinding pop, capable of destroying entire groups of enemies when placed right. A flashbang is useful, presuming the placement and timing is taken into account. Otherwise, it may end up going to waste. Rare as they are, wasting them would be ill-advised. The flares in a flare gun pop, but their ungunified version provide an advantage completely dissimilar to all of these weapons. Flares are used as a get off me button. The light from a flare is bright, staggering the enemy and causing them to backpedal. Letting go of the button drops the flare, allowing you to reload your weaponry, shine your light, or any other necessary precautions and actions. Holding down the flare button allows you to walk with it in your hand. With this, you could potentially corner an enemy, eventually popping the shadows that defend them, or you could, just as well, use this field of temporary light as a chance to progress, a chance to find a better spot to defend from, or maybe a chance to give you the space to observe the danger more clearly. Alan's wheelhouse of weaponry can, at times, be powerful, but it is not enough to guarantee himself safety. Enemies, no matter how well you manage the moment-to-moment crises, will eventually get within striking range. So much of this game's combat goes unspoken, as it is more so about your placement within any given environment. Should you backpedal yourself into a corner, you will quickly find Alan surrounded on all sides. For these matters, Alan has the ability to dodge. A rider, not a fighter, the dodge is clumsy and awkward. Alan dodges at the press of a button. Holding down that button breaks him into a sprint. Well, it's more of a limited jolly jog, but still, the dodge isn't a get out of jail free card. It doesn't even guarantee you won't get hit just because you timed your button press perfectly. However, when applied correctly, the dodge can be your saving grace, getting you out of harm's way, as well as giving you another moment to collect yourself and reposition as the game enters its movie-esque slow motion. With these weapons, items, and tactics in your arsenal, Alan makes his way through the shadowy woods, landing into the arms of Bright Falls Sheriff Sarah Breaker. Alan raises concern over his missing wife. Breaker raises concern over the missing cabin. There hasn't been a cabin island on Cauldron Lake since it was swallowed by a volcanic eruption in the 70s. Sheriff Breaker takes Alan to the place he remembers just to prove there's nothing there. And sure enough, she's right. Where is the cabin? Where is the island? Where is Alice? In a flashback 3 years prior, we get to see the home life of our author. He lives in a beautiful apartment here in New York City. Alice greets him and runs him down on some of the promotional material she's been working on for Alan's latest edition in his Alex Casey series. The latest and the last. Without any proper warning, the blizzard outside takes out the power. In an instant, Alice is frozen with fear, calling out for Alan. She isn't just simply scared of the dark, she's unnaturally petrified. Alan goes around and lights some candles and ushers her to sit romantically on the couch beside him. To comfort her, the writer does what he does best. At her request, he tells her a story. When Alan was young, he too was afraid of the dark, being plagued with nightmares. During a moment similar to the one they currently find themselves in, his mother comforted him by giving him an unusual gift. A small button, a light switch, calling it the clicker. With a press of the light switch, all his nightmares would be chased away. Alan accepted the gift and believed in it, solving all his little problems. Alice playfully says what I'm already thinking. He's making this up. While Alan insists it's true, he does so in a way that leaves me unsure. The writer stuns both Alice and myself as he pulls this light switch device from out of his pocket. It's seemingly real. Perhaps not with the magical properties a child can bestow on it, but still, the very existence of this light switch continues to spin my mind. Is the clicker an extremely convenient story that parallels these lovers' lives, or is he just making this up on the spot for the sake of his scared wife? Either way, it comforts her, less so the clicker, and more so the care he shows her. Although it also worries me that Alan is pulling out this clicker, probably deep into their relationship. How have you not talked about this before? But whatever. In the present, though, there is no comfort, no care, no clicker. Alan is brought back to the sheriff's office. There, he realizes that if he keeps talking crazy, they'll lock him up, and Alice will never be found, so he keeps his lips sealed. 3 important things occur while here in the sheriff's. 1. Alan receives a phone call.
Hello?
Alan, please help me.
Alice?
Stop talking to the law. You'll do exactly what I say if you ever want to see your wife again.
Kidnappers. They have Alice, and they're demanding the pages of the manuscript in exchange for her safety. The manuscript that Alan barely has a few pages for. They want it in completion. 2. The introduction of the best character in the game, Barry Wheeler. Barry is Alan's agent, his friend, and soon to be his only confidant in the wild world of darkness. 3. Dr. Emil Hartman, the smug bastard, attempts to stop Alan and encourage him to stay at his psychiatric hospital, Cauldron Lake Lodge. Realizing he's the chump Alice mentioned earlier, the whole reason the couple are here at all. Alan takes a shred of frustration out on Hartman's upturned nose, the Alan Wake patented right-hand special. Barry grabs Alan and they make their exit, heading to rent a cabin until meetup time with the kidnappers.
I have something important to tell you. It goes like this. For he did not know that beyond the lake he called home lies a deeper, darker ocean green, where waves are both wilder and more serene. To its ports I've been. To its ports I've been. Do you understand?
No.
Follow my light.
Throughout Alan Wake, we can find evidence of a character surrounded in mystery. A poster of Tom the Poet in a diving suit appears in the opening nightmare scene. The old gods of Asgard refer to Alan exclusively as Tom and Zane. There is paint that can only be seen by shining a flashlight on it. When doing so, you can hear it, the faint and distant breathing clearly contained within something. Perhaps a diving suit? Not much further into our narrative, Barry will mention this Zane fellow. He found a newspaper article mentioning the famed poet, yet upon further searching, no such poetry to be found. However, he is the man who once owned the cabin we resided in earlier, the one that seems to be missing. Missing due to a volcanic disturbance. Cauldron Lake swallowed it in 1970. If memory serves, on said island there was a stump. In its side, there were the carved initials of lovers, TZ and BJ. That invisible paint will refer to him further, eventually crying out to him. Did you write this, Tom? Throughout the game, we will find evidence of this person once existing, but who is he? A victim of the darkness? A pawn in a larger game? A diver? A poet? A lover? Answers lie further in the depths of our narrative, but I assure you, once we unlock the truth, we will only find further questions. While it's still day out, let's discuss an aspect of Alan Wake I would be amiss to avoid: its characters. In the 1990 cult classic television series Twin Peaks, we find ourselves rapidly introduced to an absolute cavalcade of individuals, each with their own quirks, relationships, and secrets. Over the course of the series, what can seem like an overbearing cast of chaos can become rather familiar. Not long into it, you will find that these characters are the show's beating heart, as well as its driving force. Story threads are pulled in many different directions by forces both natural and unknown. No matter the twists or turns, at the core of Twin Peaks resides this comforting cast of characters that you find yourself rather attached to. The deeper their story goes, the deeper these bonds form, the deeper you feel that attachment to their existence. Alan Wake, bearing many comparable aspects to the show Twin Peaks, finds itself lacking in this area due to its status as a third-person shooter centered around a single narrative. It gives the game focus. It gives the plot more conscious emphasis. You might imagine I'm attempting to lobby for criticism here, and yet I'm not. Because despite itself and its very existence, Alan Wake Wake manages to capture the essence of some of these memorable characters with screen time that is like a 16th of their Twin Peaks counterparts. One could argue that this is because it's borrowing from the pre-established characters and not taking the risk of being original. However, I'd starkly disagree. The characters presented to us in Alan Wake require very little for us to understand and fall in love with them. Rather, the characters only require a touch of accentuated humanism. Rose at the diner isn't just a passing fan of the writer Alan Wake. She's a superfan who loves him so much she possesses a standee of him that she either takes to work with her regularly, or perhaps she leaves it here. Maybe it just so happens to be today that she brought it with her. Let's stop thinking about the standee for a moment. Rose isn't some sort of psycho though. She's just young and excitable, a casual lady working at a casual job where she makes coffee for the same people in and out as the days tick by. One of these patrons is Rusty, a park ranger leaning over his cup of coffee. The drink is just an excuse to spend time staring at his real infatuation, the aforementioned Rose. While we may not grasp much from initial contact with Rusty, manuscript pages reveal him to be a fleshed out character with a genuine, understandable background. He bears no mystery, barely a reason to remember him, yet it feels somber to realize he will eventually read the manuscript page detailing his own shadowy compromise. Soon, he will be taken, and Alan will have to kill him. Tor and Odin Anderson need very few words. They stand out on their own. If not visually, then perhaps their senile rambling. Odin's insistent begging to hear Lime in the Coconut one more time. Rusty's precaution that they are just here until Dr. Hartman picks them up. They are, perhaps, characters that need little emphasis to stress their potential to stand out. Therefore, I will move on. The Lamp Lady, Cynthia Weaver, warns Alan not to walk into the darkness, standing at the end of a lightless hall, clutching her lamp. A clear reference to the Log Lady of Twin Peaks. Yet, unlike her television counterpart, Cynthia has much more plot relevance than we may originally ascertain. In this initial contact at the diner, she still manages to stand out. Perhaps she's crazy. Perhaps she's just another old lady clutching onto her last piece of sanity in the form of a lamp. Or maybe she's the only one who somewhat understands what's going on. These are just the characters here in the Oh Dear Diner. We haven't even stepped out of the opening at this point, and Alan Wake has already presented us with a strong potential to attach us to its characters, to flash us their tropes, then use those to maximum effectiveness. Sheriff Sarah Breaker is pretty stern, trying to keep order, and yet, when you're a sheriff of a tiny town, you can't help but apply a little more empathy and heart to every situation. You can feel her true nature shining just behind her badge. As the game progresses, you see her bravery shine even brighter. Her story contains a few layers of interest just beyond the surface if you're willing to keep your ears open. Her father, the former sheriff of Bright Falls, has his own storied connections to organizations of secrecy. While this information isn't pertinent to the main plot, it's intriguing, enticing, interesting. Paul Randolph, manager of a mobile home lot, has some of the most minimal screen time in this game and still manages to seem like a living character. He has an unexplained limp. He claims himself as a God-fearing type when stories of Bright Falls myths are brought up. When Alan and Barry get a call from Rose claiming she has some of the manuscript pages, they show up here and ask Randolph to escort them to her home. As any small towner would, he asks what it is these two out-of-town city slickers want with Rose. Barry's response, "We're just here to talk to her, pal," should set off many alarm bells. When nighttime rolls around and the two haven't left the home, Paul does what any nosy citizen would do: contact the sheriff. Completely understandable, completely expected of a character. In just one scene, Remedy's writers managed to make their world continue to feel believable. Now, what Paul doesn't know is that the boys aren't extending their stay out of villainy or sinful practices. Rose, subtly taken by the darkness, has drugged the two, keeping them from progressing in their journey. Even worse than that, however, is who's riding up in the sheriff's stead. FBI agent Robert Nightingale is one more character on the list, and oh boy, is he a piece of work. Nightingale spouts threats every single time he's on screen. Every encounter with Wake contains a new mocking name, each one being a famous writer undoubtedly more talented than Alan. Nightingale is a pistol-whipping, one-lining hard hitter in all the worst ways possible. He gives no chance for explanation. He listens to no one but himself and his all-powerful badge, and the moment Alan Wake is before him, even in the presence of a potential civilian casualty, he doesn't hesitate to open fire. Not once, but twice he performs this dangerous act. Nightingale is in opposition to all fronts of the narrative, a grenade in a field of roses. His aggression in the face of pacifism rubs every member of Bright Falls the wrong way, earning him zero sympathy and countless enemies. However, what motivates the badge-flashing bastard into this state of being isn't just a symptom of an any means necessary attitude. Manuscript pages reveal that Nightingale has acquired a few pages of his own. On one of these pages, he reads of his own demise. If the pages are to be trusted, the darkness itself will eventually drag him away, yanking him out of our tale. Alan Wake, the man, should have no knowledge of Agent Nightingale's involvement. What's more, further readings will reveal that Nightingale isn't even currently employed by the Bureau. He's just a loose cannon with a drunken vendetta, on a self-imposed quest to wrap his mind around what revolves around the darkness that Alan Wake perpetuates. I'll stop here. By now, you get the idea. Characters within Alan Wake's tale contain within them a shocking amount of charm. Each one feels properly motivated in our plot. Every member of the roster remains remarkable in their role. When reading the manuscript pages, these individuals somehow manage to ascend beyond that of a purposeful piece to the puzzle that is our narrative, and become the naturally memorable members of the small town of Bright Falls. By fleshing out the characters, they in turn flesh out the town. The town reflects back onto them, creating something rather unique and beautiful in the world of gaming. Alan meets up with the kidnapper, hits him with the Alan Wake patented right-hand special, gets separated from the kidnapper, plans to reconvene with the kidnapper, gets shot at by the cops, arrives at the meetup point, our kidnapper doesn't show, demands they meet elsewhere. Alan hunts him down through the darkness. After all of this though, much to Alan's dismay, he arrives just a moment too late. The previously met bog-standard Lady of Darkness stands over our antagonist. In desperation, the napping ne'er-do-well reveals the truth to her. He never had Alice at all. It was a ruse to get the manuscript. The kidnapper implies there is a grander conspiracy at play. He is the mere lackey, a puppet. So who then is pulling the strings? Who could know about the manuscript? Why do they want it so badly? Before we can get proper answers, the darkness unleashes a storm that sweeps up the kidnapper. Before it manages to suck Wake in its wind, he plunges himself into the waters below. Beneath the dark, murky surface that continues to hold the reins of his tormented fate, the dark void of Cauldron Lake embraces Alan once more. Before we progress in our tale, let's take a moment for me to lay out a few things about this game that are ultimately not going to come across in any video about it. Firstly, let's talk about the bizarre choice from Remedy to make Alan Wake appear as though it is an episodic story, containing chapters in the game referred to as episodes, as well as a
Previously on Alan Wake
recap just before jumping into the next part. Alan Wake isn't the first to give this style an attempt. It certainly will never be the last. Overall, though, I'd argue that it isn't used all the greatest here either. Games like Telltale's The Walking Dead would release to glorious praise 2 years later. Telltale, experienced with the episodic format, managed to release their game episode by episode, each one containing their own style, narrative focus, powerful cliffhangers, and previews of the upcoming episode, each one also beginning with the good old
Previously on The Walking Dead.
This allowed the game to really obtain that prestige television feel and accentuated the experience overall. Each episode is a girthy but digestible chunk of meat. Every episode slowly moves our characters down their path of progression. Splitting up these parts into episodes allows for a fresh form of storytelling and a clear point of indication of when to wrap up a session of play. In Alan Wake, episodes provide almost none of these positives. While the credits logo and recaps can serve to help invoke the reminiscent illusion that the game is elevated to the level of a modern prestige television show, it doesn't seem to assist the game in any meaningful way. Don't get me wrong, I'm glad this game isn't broken into real episodic storytelling. Buying the Alan Wake Season Pass and downloading each episode individually would have been a headache I wish not undertake. The major problems that come into play with the way it is implemented, though, are evident when compared to Walking Dead's success in their formatting. Episodes in Alan Wake are not even. Some are lengthy sections of fighting taken, some are jaunts through environments with characters to meet and very little else to do. The episode leading up to where we are in the story consists of a shockingly massive environment where you just kinda drive and pick up supplies and collectibles. Then, when night falls, you spend another considerably lengthy amount of time fighting your way to the kidnapper's location on Mirror's Peak. Most of this chapter is spent in the realm of gameplay, with precious little in the way of cutscenes and meaningful experiences. The episode upcoming, while the best part in the whole game, is in stark contrast to this. Episode 4 is an ever-constant series of events that is absolutely filled to bursting with memorable moments, captivating cutscenes, and tough-as-nails encounters. So, with this, episodes feel rather unfair to each other. Even though I'd argue that plenty of television can be this way, separating the game into chunks in this manner just highlights an issue that needn't exist. I think the only thing that the episodes really could have done to win me over was if they had provided a clear stopping point. A allowing you to save your game and giving you the option to exit to the main menu or continue playing. Yet, it doesn't. Almost immediately after the Alan Wake logo flashes and the credits roll, the recap for that previous episode plays. There's so little pause that it just leaves me a little confused on why this episodic format was left in at all. Speaking of things that needed a trim, while the game didn't receive an episodic release in the vein of a Telltale game, it did find itself getting reworked quite drastically during development. To not mention this fact would be a grand disservice to the game and would leave this video rather incomplete. So, while it may not be the best place for it, let's talk about it here. In development, Remedy had originally envisioned Alan Wake as something closer to an open-world, explorative sandbox game. This gameplay choice led to many grand creations, yet also invited one massive overlying issue. Finding a marriage between the narrative and gameplay was a deep headache. Eventually, Remedy had their backs to the wall, and creative director Sam Lake had no choice but to call in the scissors. Dynamic day and night cycles were removed. A Grand Theft Auto gameplay design was trimmed down to a linear narrative. What was once envisioned as a survival game now found itself down a much more narrow hallway, becoming that of a basic action thriller. This session of brainstorming ways to keep as much completed work as possible while letting go of so much might seem like a submission to conformity. However, in this hare's humble opinion, that is not the case. Alan Wake, by narrowing its focus and allowing the narrative to take a front seat, gave the entire game a fighting chance, and, if you ask me, allowed it to stand out as well as stand the test of time by opposing the ever-popular open-world design of the time. What Alan Wake undeniably gained with this endeavor was one of the most memorable and realistic environments possible. Landmarks are consistent and omnipresent. The town feels compact and believable. Even the off-roads remain convincing. The world feels so real, because it is, more than you might think upon first glance. Remedy kept their open-world map as intact as they could and used it to its fullest, making for a game that stands out in its environmental design despite being a linear title taking place in a rather unremarkable location. That being said, let me stop the praise for just a moment. Again, there is a distinct difference in playing this game and listening to me discuss it. One way this would be quite clear is in the gameplay. While I have already outlined the majority of what you will be doing in this game, with the exception of collecting supplies left behind by some mysterious benefactor, aware of the dangers of the darkness, I have not expressed to you how the combat is conveyed throughout the campaign. When wandering through the dark woods of Bright Falls, you can feel the eerie sense of unease creep up your back. Within the shadows they lurk. When stomping through these sections, I could likely convince you that tension is high. Occasionally, I did find myself letting out a little grunt or gasp as I realized an enemy had gotten the jump on me, lunging towards me from off screen, though much to my dismay, that was a rather rare occurrence. Yes, I could easily convince you that this game is a chiller and a thriller just as it professes. Yet, if I did so, I would be lying. In fact, I've already lied. Previously, I mentioned that when observing television sets or radio broadcasts, a player must make the conscious choice to cease all actions and leave themselves open to be ambushed. Well, worry no longer, because what I left out was the part that you surely never will be attacked. And even if the game did decide to jump you, you probably wouldn't be caught off guard. Taken, emerge from the shadows of the woods, but if the game is even the slightest bit uncertain that you manage to notice the oncoming enemy, it will proudly show you. A slow zoom and pan towards their location, a dramatic stinger sound effect, even a little bit of added brightness. It is impossible not to know you are about to be ambushed 9 times out of 10. On that 10th time, the game will have just made a small mistake, or you will have passed your camera over an enemy without properly realizing it. Either way, this is just one prime example of Alan Wake's inexperienced dip into the realm of horror, and is just a taste of my overall dissatisfaction. Mind you, I like this game, and I don't think it would be fair for me to chastise it for something it's not. However, there are so many elements, both discussed and undiscussed, that play into this narrative and genuinely create an exciting feeling of unnerving surrealism. So many times I think the narrative plays a hand in leaning towards the maddening David Lynch inspiration it boasts. So many times the gameplay does not match. By being a thriller game rather than an attempt at horror, Alan Wake clears the bar of being good while narrowly missing the bar of being excellent. In so many ways, I can praise this game up and down and eagerly admit that it lives within my brain constantly ever since hitting the credits. Yet, in so many other ways, I just wonder if it's all I've cracked it up to be, or if maybe the image of Alan Wake I keep referring to is an image conjured in my own mind. Or maybe, to understand what elevates this game beyond its button inputs, we just need to dive a little deeper. Alan Wake, wakes. pulled from Cauldron Lake by our good friend Dr. Emil Hartman. In a moment of consciousness, Hartman reveals the truth. We are a patient of his and have been for some time. Alice is dead, and her death has caused a mental collapse within Wake. When Alan finally comes to and hops out of bed, he finds himself in the Cauldron Lake Lodge, Hartman's psychiatric institution for the artistic and creative souls of Bright Falls. Hartman escorts us through the lodge, assisting us in remembering the tragic reality we find ourselves in. Alice has drowned, and with her passing, Wake has begun to experience schizophrenia, hallucinations, paranoia, and obsession with light and darkness. Within this madness, Hartman has deduced that Alan has convinced himself of a bizarre and rather unique delusion of grandeur. Wake has concocted a fantasy in which his writings have the ability to affect reality, and he is attempting to take advantage of this ability to rescue his wife from some sort of supernatural forces of darkness. Hartman continues on, and the more he speaks, the more it makes sense. Doesn't all of this just add up in places? Alan watched his wife drown, and rather than confronting the reality of her death, he has convinced himself that she has been kidnapped, abducted by forces that are beyond comprehension, just so that there is no conceivable way to prove whether it is fact or fiction. This obsession with light and darkness makes sense, perhaps spawning from Alice's fear of the dark. Irrational panic sets in the moment the power dips out during the earlier flashback. What if she wasn't so unjustified in her fear, thinks the crazed writer. Justification and explanation continue when Alan looks out onto the lake. Still no cabin to be found. Is this evidence of his madness or his sanity? A sundial monument of unclear purpose other than to remember a TZ. Perhaps this is an explanation for the Thomas Zane character in Wake's mind. After all, Barry did say there was no record of a poet by that name. Barry. Anyways, another patient, Emerson, is video game obsessed. The specific game obsession in question stands out. Night Springs, the video game. Is that where the Night Springs connection comes from? So then, were those Night Springs episodes that I watched figments of Alan's imagination? Never mind that. Look who it is. The Anderson brothers, old gods of Asgard, the catalyst of my entire journey. They too are here in the lodge. Poor things are plagued with dementia, succumbing to the madness. A storm is rolling in. The power flickers, and Hartman dismisses himself, encouraging Wake to return to his room and continue writing. The Andersons, however, present a crazed alternative. Crazy. They're crazy, yet also, maybe this world is crazy too. Maybe it takes crazy to understand crazy. Perhaps this entire journey wasn't the delusions of a grief-stricken madman. I guess there's really only one way to find out. The Andersons, referring to us exclusively as Tom and Zane, direct us towards the Anderson farm. There, we are promised answers. Still though, I cannot help but pause at the continued delivery of doubt. While the next several minutes will potentially confirm that the darkness is real, powerful, and after Alan with a vengeance, this seed of doubt does begin to sprout within my mind. What if none of this is real? Alan Wake is a writer, a creative. He remains capable of creating delusions of a convincing nature. Perhaps there's a reason for that missing gap in time, a gap in memory caused by a trauma, attempting to protect Alan from the pain of reality. What if this is always the case? What if every event, every game, every story preceding this moment is just an author in anarchic denial, without the full picture? How can we know for certain? This is a piece of psychological horror that I so often love. The old "is he crazy" wrench thrown into a narrative. Perhaps a tad overused in modern times, yet when done well, this narrative twist has the potential to serve as a thought experiment that plays out both forward and backwards. For the rest of my Remedy experience, I will continue to question what is real. When looking back on this game, I will dare to question its potential fabrication. Regardless of its effect now, if left ambiguous enough, we may be in for a confusingly entertaining ride. The only way to clear up the confusion is to dive even deeper. We need answers, and if we are to believe our crazed comrades, we will find it at their farm. The Andersons create a distraction. During the chaos, Alan finds pages of his manuscript in Hartman's office, as well as a revolver. The pages and an image in the hall piece together the all too clear fact that Hartman is the puppeteer who had been attempting to manipulate us with this kidnapping scenario. Hartman is a dirtbag, a liar, and for the past many years he has been attempting to leech off of the creativity of his patients. Cauldron Lake contains the darkness. The darkness feeds off of the artist. Hartman feeds off of this relationship. While it would be satisfying to take some vengeance for those he's wronged, hit him with one more patented right-hand special, there's no time. The darkness descends upon the lodge, claiming Hartman as a victim. We find Barry, who was locked away with his newly acquired, in other words stolen, Alan Wake standee, and make a narrow escape, heading for Valhalla. The episode entitled The Truth isn't done dishing out excitement. Like I mentioned before, this is the episode where stuff does not stop popping off. Wake explains all that he's pieced together to Barry on the way to the farm. The Dark Presence twists the work of nearby artists to its bidding. It twists their works to its will and takes something of importance. The Andersons seemingly gave the darkness control over storms and ravens, both having been a headache throughout the game. Thomas Zane was tricked into releasing the Dark Presence when it took possession of his deceased love. Alan Wake had lost his beloved wife and now has realized that the manuscript is allowing the darkness to take control of everything. But perhaps the power this writing holds can be used further to get Alice back, no strings attached. Barry, remaining as the ever-loving right hand he is on board, wacky or not. He recognizes the wild world collapsing around him, and he's willing to take the long shot with Alan. Darkness plays its hand once more and careens their vehicle off a cliff. The two fight through countless dangers, tearing through taken, possessed objects, everything to get to the farm. But once the two get there...
Ow! Run! Incoming! There's too many of them! God damn!
The preceding moments consist of an incredible stand your ground section where the pyrotechnics and spotlights pair with a wealth of ammo as you defend against an incoming horde of Taken. Both a challenge and a power trip, the stage performance is elevated even further with the addition of a rock ballad by the old gods of Asgard themselves. While the story will continue to provide concepts that stand out in my mind and linger within my curiosity, this moment here is what I would describe as the most memorable in terms of gameplay. The dramatic payoff of narrative buildup, the environmental signposting, and the application of everything we've learned during combat. God, this is video games. The music dies down and the lights dim. Alan and Barry head inside the Andersons' home. Inside is a record, the poet and the muse. They realize all too quickly that this is the message the Andersons were trying to deliver. If the song is to be taken at its word, they need to find the Lady of the Light, the Lamp Lady, Cynthia Weaver, an old flame of Thomas Zane's. The duo plan to head back to town and track her down as soon as the light shines. Barry finds the Andersons' special moonshine and the two get plastered. The alcoholic concoction is made with unfiltered lake water, and so with its consumption comes a little something unexpected. Alan falls asleep and is transported to an out-of-body experience as he witnesses what is the actual truth the episode title is referring to, our missing week. As far as we know, Alan dove in after Alice and inexplicably woke up a week later in a crashed car. Now we witness what really happened. The Dark Presence puppeteering the body of Barbara Jagger, the scary bog-standard lady that gave us the key to this cabin, coerces Alan the moment he resurfaces and crawls onto the pier. Using Alice as bait, she convinces Alan to re-enter the cabin. When he makes it to the room with the typewriter, Barbara starts reeling Alan in even deeper. Alice is dead and drowned, she says. It's your fault. However, through the power of Cauldron Lake and the writing capabilities Alan possesses, he can write her back. Barbara stands over Alan, hand on his shoulder, guiding his process as an editor. She sought to use him to further her power, release the Dark Presence, and allow it to consume all. Alan mashed away on the typewriter, creating the manuscript of the departure that we have been collecting pieces of throughout the game, detailing the events of the story exactly as they would happen. Despite the brain fog, Alan remained aware enough of the dangers and the situation to write himself as the main character of this story, as well as an escape. A brief moment after a week of straight writing where he could make his escape due to the appearance and assistance of Thomas Zane. Alan escaped the cabin, barely made it to a car, and then ran off the road. That is where we joined him in his conscious memories. So, let's take a moment to really recap and allow all of this to sink in. With the game showing its hand, I want to make sure we are all on the same page. When we first arrive in the video game of Alan Wake, Thomas Zane, embodying an intense source of light, appears to us and provides assistance. He is responsible for placing the manuscript pages we find. It is his will to provide them to us when and where we find them, thus explaining their occasional relevance and irrelevance to us in the plot. It could even be argued that when a safe haven streetlight flickers on, it is his protective will. But just who is Thomas Zane? That is up for some series of debates, shockingly, considering that despite evidence to the contrary, the guy seemingly doesn't exist. During the scene in the trailer park, Barry admits that he's done a little investigating. The island, now disappeared, that Alan had insisted existed, had been owned by a famous writer, Thomas Zane. Despite this claim of writing fame, there is no evidence to prove he wrote anything. Zane's first several in-game moments are presented with a poem. The song we listened to, titled The Poet and the Muse, and the monument to a TZ by the Lodge are only a handful of examples that point towards Zane being some sort of poet. As we progress through the game, we are given many more pieces through Alan Wake in the television, manuscript pages, and dialogue from characters that allow us to piece only a small fraction of a story together. From what we can gather, Thomas Zane and his partner, Barbara Jagger, moved to Bright Falls and obtained the island resting upon Cauldron Lake. Zane was allegedly a huge fan of diving, which would explain his diving suit. In some sort of diving accident, or perhaps dark manipulation, his beloved Barbara drowns. Through the power of the lake, Thomas brought her back to life, but now she was twisted and unnerving. Attempting to fix the problem he started, he ties Barbara to a chair and cuts out her heart, yet she still lives. Zane makes some proper preparations and decides to enact a plan to try and fix the damage he's caused. The poet did what he allegedly did best and wrote himself out of existence. Furthermore, he wrote for a dormant volcano under the lake to erupt, swallowing the cabin, himself, and Barbara into its depths. I have given you only the most surface level of readings of this situation. I have skipped over the part where Cynthia Weaver, the lamp lady, was involved in a major crush or maybe even love triangle with our poet. I have ignored the small pieces of curiosity I have picked up within my time playing Control. I do this because these details are unnecessary in the face of the horror I find myself fixated on when it comes to the existence of Thomas Zane. Because let's think about this for a moment. Is Thomas Zane a deus ex machina, a convenient excuse for the story of Alan Wake? Or is Alan Wake a creation of Thomas Zane, solely written into existence to clean up this mess the poet made? No matter which way the coin flips, it's a rather ghastly thought. Either way, two people have lived an entire life, fell in love, accomplished amazing things, developed friends, and struggled with the many human complexities life tends to throw at us, all in potential service of someone else's grand goal. Their whole lives have existed just so they could save the other from this nightmare of cosmic proportions. Don't get me wrong, with a game titled Alan Wake, we could easily say that he is the god of this world, that he is the creator and Thomas is the character, but does that really make it any better? Cynthia Weaver, who we will properly meet in a few minutes of gameplay, has lived a life devoted to the dying requests of her deceased lover. The Anderson brothers still fondly hold their friend within their drug and age-melted minds. This colleague of theirs still clearly stirs up happy and fond feelings, seeing as every time Alan walks in their presence, they refer to him as Tom or Zane with a wide grin. To hope that it's Thomas who is the character and Alan as the creator is to look at this tragic tale with a narrow vision, to not realize that either could be true, especially considering that more than once Thomas Zane is implied to look exactly like Alan Wake, would be foolish. While this game isn't a grand example of the horror genre, it is a great piece of existentialism and eldritch experimentation. I have found myself spending an ungodly amount of time pondering on this intricate relationship, creator and character. Is it not inherently cruel for the creator to spawn a being into existence just to make them suffer? Is it not terrifying to consider that you may exist, assuming you contain free will and a selection of the options the world has to offer, only for you to narrowly serve a purpose pre-established and forced upon you? For that matter, where does this string theory end? If your name is on a page of the manuscript, does the world, universe, and time itself bend to the manuscript's will, spawning you into existence? The Andersons are mentioned on a page describing them well in the past. Does this make them characters or people that Wake has taken advantage of? Or what about Agent Nightingale? Alan has no possible way of knowing that this person exists, and yet he proactively places the man's name on paper, describing the moment he reads pages from the manuscript. Does this mean that Alan has some omnipresent understanding of the world around him? Does the magic of Cauldron Lake just have the ability to place people in the world just because their name appears once in the manuscript? Does this mean that Nightingale's entire life, existence, and alcoholic downfall into the realm of suffering occurred only because Alan needed him as stakes to this plot to rescue his wife? Is Nightingale even a person? Is anyone in this story real beyond the pages of the manuscript? During the game, Alan Wake appears on the screens of televisions throughout the environment. Every time the setting is always the same. The room with the typewriter on the second floor of Birdleg Cabin. The camera we peer in from, always in the same position. As we watch the writer pounding away, hard at work at what we now hard to confirm know as the manuscript, we can watch as he slowly degrades in his mental state. Not only that, but he begins to turn and realize that we are there. Is he noticing us, as in Alan of the present? Maybe he's noticing the camera recording him. But if that's the case, who is recording? Why is the camera there? Or perhaps now, it's exactly what it first felt like. It's me. He's looking at me. After all, is there not one more layer of existentialism to all of this? Are we just going to ignore the next layer of this concept? Which is the creator, which is the character? Sure. But what about us? Are we not gods of this realm, controlling and contorting our protagonist, ushering him down a linear hallway that will inevitably lead to a tragic ending? Is Alan Wake not our puppet to torture as we see fit? Maybe I'm going off the deep end with this, but all my fears and paranoid confusions are echoed once Alan, Barry, and Sheriff Breaker reach Cynthia, who reveals to them what Thomas Zane had left her all those many years ago, a shoebox. Within that shoebox is the tool left for Alan in order for him to defeat the thing now possessing Barbara Jagger's body. Alan opens the box to reveal the clicker. It is explicitly stated that this device was left for Alan by Thomas Zane. Manuscripts are here in the shoebox, written by Thomas Zane about Alan Wake's childhood experience, the moment his mother gifts him the clicker. Let that sink in. How did the clicker get here if it was gifted to Alice 3 years ago? Exactly who wrote who into existence? Is it that Alan has written the clicker into existence and Thomas's life, love, and suffering was in service of this device finding its way here? Or did Thomas Zane write this page and set the ball in motion for this moment of Wake regaining the clicker to happen no matter what? There is little time to think it over. Torch and a light switch in hand, Alan battles the forces of darkness all the way back to Cauldron Lake, now prepared to dive deep into its depths and finish this. As Alan makes his journey back, let's discuss some rules that are in place that aren't heavily emphasized, but I appreciate it regardless. The Dark Presence, from what I can gather, is a malevolent force trapped within Cauldron Lake. It can, however, influence the outside world in typically very subtle ways. Whether it is the Dark Presence, the magical properties of the lake, or some sexy third option, I'm not sure. Regardless, somehow, artists are able to create works that can reshape reality around them when in the vicinity of this lake. However, as with most dark and powerful gifts, there are takebacks, there are rules, there is the small print. Make a mistake, overstep your boundaries, attempt to cut some corners, and the magic doesn't quite work the same. Make enough wrong steps and you'll find yourself in the grasp of the darkness like Zane did. Thomas Zane attempted to allegedly cut corners in his process of attempting to return his beloved Barbara. Seemingly, this is why she returned a puppet to the powers that be. So if Alan is to pull his personal rescue plan off correctly, he has to do this properly. His story, The Departure, is yet unfinished. At the beginning of the game, the Dark Presence had merely wished to drag him back to the cabin and finish the story in a way that would best suit its needs. As Alan has gotten closer to having a shot at defeating the darkness, that goal has changed. Alan is too dangerous now. Wake is aware of the unfinished story, page resting within the typewriter. If this story is to play out with minimal consequences, he has to return to the typewriter and finish the story. Alan's decision to insert himself as the main character is an extremely dangerous one that puts him in the path of peril. However, it also allows him to assure that he is the one both in control of the narrative as well as forced along its path, though that's not all. By putting himself as the main character, there is an unspoken balancing act. Horrors and thrillers do not often have happy endings. There is commonly a sense of ambiguity and uncertainty to its morally conflicting conclusions. Wake, somehow grasping the rules of the narrative, knows there is no happy ending without struggle. A story must have tension, motivation, and conflict for the reader to engage and the tale to feel natural. Thus, Alan Wake's writing is constrained to the rules of good storytelling. If it isn't natural, if it doesn't make sense, he leaves himself open, vulnerable to the darkness's consumption as it can twist its dagger deeper. This is, in a word, brilliant. Good horror requires rules and stakes. We are given both and can now operate an entire story around them. And I think that's what captivates me most about the narrative nature of this game. Alan has essentially trapped himself in a cage of his own creation, and that feeling is only going to be amplified by this game's conclusion. In a metaphorical sense, the implications of the story being that of the criticism of watching an outside force corrupt and edit your work into resembling something you don't recognize, but being forced to work under those constraints for the sake of something you love it's powerful, assuming you look deep enough. So, while I may criticize the gameplay for failing to be proper horror, I do not feel the same about its story whatsoever. After an onslaught of Taken, Ravens, and raging storms, Alan Wake stands on the edge of a sheer drop. He grips the clicker, takes one deep breath, and performs a leap of faith. We have arrived at our final stop. This is the conclusion. Alan jerks awake. It was another nightmare, all of it. He's back in New York. His wife is fine. The power is out again, but why isn't Alice scared? Alan sees through the ruse instantly. This is certainly not his wife. He barks for her to turn the lights on. She just encourages him to join her in bed. This is the Dark Place's power. This is its attempt to subdue Alan. He conjures the clicker and presses it, washing away the illusion, and ushers in Thomas Zane in his diving suit. Thomas tells Alan he has to fill Barbara's dark soul with light. Alan turns to see another version of himself, a strange, twisted mirror image. Thomas Zane introduces Alan to Mr. Scrooge. Don't ask, I'm not getting into him, not in this video. As far as this game goes, the only answers we have are that he is going to meet everyone in the outside world in Alan's absence. His wry smile and leering gaze only accompanied by a slight nod. Whatever he's here for, it doesn't seem like he has the best of intentions. Taking what I have learned from watching Twin Peaks season 1 and 2, he's perhaps a twisted doppelganger. What he will go on to do is left a mystery as our camera remains fixed on our protagonist. Moving on rather rapidly from that, we are thrust into the Dark Place, a gray and green-toned foggy nightmare realm. Within this realm, in the last few moments of gameplay, the video game starts using this concept of floating words, symbolizing objects that could be written into the world. Alan shines his torch on them and they pop into reality, a clacking typewriter sounding off in the distance. Alan pops these things into existence, making his way through the dark realm as echoes of events that never happened sound off in his ear. Alice screaming for Alan to stop the abuse. Alan yelling that he wants his Alice back. Still performed by Alice and Alan, however, the voices start to tell a different couple's tale. "Untie me," Alice says. "You're not Barbara," Alan replies. "I should have never brought you back. Your heart is full of darkness." The iconic sound of a blade, a knife, rings in the distance.
Heart is filled with darkness. I cut it out. Take it back to the depths of paper.
We hear as meat is slowly sliced. An organ is removed. Alan makes it to Birdleg Cabin, spawning it into reality via his flashlight. He can hear the real Alice shouting for help from within. He opens the door. Barbara Jagger stands alone in the middle of the room. As she attempts to evil monologue, Alan approaches, puts his hand in the hole where her heart used to be, and presses the switch to the clicker. A blinding light consuming the inside of the cabin. Alan is alone now, Barbara Jagger nowhere to be seen. With a determined look and a clear head, Alan takes a seat at the typewriter and does what he does best. There are rules. There is a cost. There is a balance necessary in a tale such as this. Whether Alan is breaking those rules and soon to suffer for it, or he is acting within those rules by taking Alice's place, it's left ambiguous and unclear, and I wouldn't want it any other way. Regardless, Alice resurfaces from Cauldron Lake's inky black waters, gasping for air. There is still no cabin. There is no island. There is no Alan. Bright Falls feels a return to normal as Deerfest kicks off. A tiny parade, characters in celebration and camaraderie. The Andersons dance. Rose, however, clutches a lamp, forever changed by her corruption. Nightingale, too, looming in the distance. A click-clack of the typewriter starts out soft, then envelops all sound. Trapped in the Dark Place, Alan remains seated at the typewriter. In one of the most famously unclear endings conceivable, Alan looks up at the camera, eyes wide and lifeless. He utters those famous final words that shake the foundations of this game and the connected Remedy universe on large. It's not a lake. It's an ocean. One final clack as Alice whispers for Alan to wake up.
Wake up.
What does it mean? What is the significance of that line? Why is Alice's line so important as to be the last thing we hear? Why is this video filled to the brim with non-stop questions that are never given answers? Simply because that's the fun of Alan Wake. I went into this game with some bizarre expectations and plenty of times felt like I was beginning to feel a twinge of disappointment. Too often the gameplay felt a little sticky. So many times I felt a little feeling within that was getting burnt out and wanted to stop. Then it would all dissipate as I stopped to observe some of the game's more enticing mysteries and secrets. The more the game gave me to feed on outside the moment-to-moment gameplay, the more I felt myself falling deeper in love with its storytelling style. Like, for just a small example, the TVs. All of the Night Springs episodes and Alan Wake experiences are entertaining and captivating enough by themselves. But then one, only one, has this little moment, where all the others contain Alan monologuing and narrating his writing process. This one has only a brief moment where darkness flashes behind him and Alan mouths along with the narration.
A dark presence is wearing the old woman's face. She was covered in clinging shadows. There's a hole in her chest where her heart should be.
It is only here. It only happens once. But the fact that it happened at all has had me infatuated for months. Don't just sit there and think about the narrative implications or the fact that it's chilling. Think about this from a creator's standpoint. Think about how unnecessary that addition is. Think about what that would be like to film. Think about the fact that they filmed it at all. They knew what it would look like. They knew where it would go. They knew it was easily missable, but they put in the effort anyways. That's what I walk away from this game feeling. I feel the creative spirit piercing through this game and reigniting my own. The journey into the realm of Remedy was a rough and bumpy road, but now that I've arrived, I'm well beyond locked in. Even if you sit there and have already given Alan Wake a shot in the past, putting it down after a few hours or less, I am willing to bet that the story still managed to grip you. It makes you conceive notions, ask questions, and overall just engages with the player in a way that the average video game would never. By playing with different forms of entertainment and the mediums in which we tell stories, it opens itself to a much wider range of possibilities that only Remedy seems keen on taking advantage of. Using their live actors for the television and photos, providing manuscripts as an optional collectible that ties heavily into the narrative, and by even having plenty of other related projects that continually tie into and out from this one story. Alan Wake is the catalyst for a terrific tale that spans across several games in ways subtle and overt. I encourage you to engage with this company's games not just because of the narrative satisfaction, not just because of the potential astoundment you'll find along the way, but because, seriously, ask yourself the question of who else is out there doing this kind of stuff? The answer is no one. At least no one on this level of doing it. From here, the collection of games from Remedy spins out in many different variations and levels of intrigue and success. Yet all, whether it's just a tiny Easter egg, a reference, or it's an entire dedicated story DLC, relates back to Alan Wake in one way or another. Each story adding on to the previous and the next in ways that really make you scratch your head, unsure of where one begins and the other ends. Alan Wake wrote Alex Casey, a legal stand-in for Max Payne. Control is a game about a bureau in charge of containing and studying the strange unexplained events in our world. Bright Falls being a heavily researched topic. Even Quantum Break, a game made at the behest of Microsoft and mostly unconnected, still contains within it many secrets and ideas that may continue to become relevant. And isn't that the most potentially interesting part? Isn't that the most genuinely genius design ever? To make you ask questions and to give you this gateway drug of a game that just makes you want to lean in and take in every single piece of anything connected to this universe. To me, Remedy remains a development studio that I will treasure and sing the praises of, as they stand as this testament in the gaming industry as a representation of my favorite parts about the art form of video games. They tell stories with compelling narratives, innovative and experimental gameplay, and dare to dream, reaching high for the stars. In a modern world of drab, uninspired, money-focused, executive-controlled trite, it's nice to know that Remedy now sits in the industry as a break from that nauseating norm, and it all starts here. Alan Wake serving not as a one-time flash of interest, but a passion project spanning many years and excellent entries. Alan Wake serving not as Remedy's lake, but as its ocean.
Alan, wake up.
And that's the video. This took way longer to make than I had expected it to. Not really any particular reason. Life just kind of got in the way. If you enjoy the video, don't forget that a like is a completely free way to help support the channel. And an even better way is to subscribe. We're nearly at 2,000 subscribers, which is a pretty exciting milestone. And while I certainly don't expect this video to do gangbusters, I think getting to that 2,000 mark would be a very nice way to celebrate the completion of this video. As long as the process to make this video was, this is just one step in a very long journey as we enter the Remedy rabbit hole and dig a little deeper. Of course, that is a lot of games for me to get through, and while I do promise to get through at least the vast majority of them, it is going to take a while, so please be patient with me. It may take some time for us to get to our destination. Next thing for me to work on is Hare's Haunting Hour, and I'm very excited for what I'm going to do there. So I'm going to go ahead and get started on that. If you would like to support me even further, just $1 here on YouTube for the members program, or on Patreon, same price. You get access to outtakes, a few more behind the scenes stuff, and of course the monthly show of Rambling Rabbit, which is always a joy, and I need to hurry up and go film one of those for this month. Got lots to do, so you already know what time it is. I'll catch you down the road. Be excellent to each other.